Our chalice reading today comes from the Unitarian community of Rio de Janeiro. It is the global chalice lighting for this month from the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists. Let it be a reminder that on this day, our nation's birthday, we are part of the wider world. We light this flame as a reminder of our mission of being a light to the world in unity with those who came before us. Together, let us commit to the building of a community of free faith beyond geographical limits and personal beliefs. May we be a shelter to all who need it the most. Amen. Our gathering song this morning is number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. The words are copied in the chat screen. Please keep your mics muted and simply sing along at home if you would like.
Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. I'm Bill Brock. My pronouns are he, him, his. No matter who you are or where you've come from, you are welcome here. Whether or not you live in Des Moines or have ever physically been at First Unitarian. Whoever you are, we hope that here you find thoughts which challenge you, welcome which invites you into community, and people to accompany you as you journey. The Reverend Dr. Cynthia Landrum is with us today. Reverend Landrum is the minister of the First Parish Church of Stowe and Acton in Stowe, Massachusetts. She's been in ministry for 20 years, having previously served churches in Michigan and Texas. She grew up UU in Michigan. Her family consists of her husband, her teen daughter, and 2 cats. Reverend Landrum.
Sorry about that, folks. I'm having some technical difficulties over here this morning, as one is wont to do when one is doing something important. As Bill said, and thank you for that introduction, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Landrum. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you this morning from Marlborough, which is near Stowe, where I serve. I want to acknowledge that I sit on the traditional lands of the Nipmuc and Pawtucket people, just as many of you are on the traditional territory of the indigenous Iowa people, and ask that whenever you hear a land acknowledgement, you consider donating to support a group that is supporting indigenous rights. Bill Brock is today's celebrant. Bruce Martin is our pianist. Barb Martin is our song leader, and Anne Mowry is our pastoral care associate for this week. Did you say it was Lyra Halston who is the membership coordinator? I want to make sure I get that name right. And is here with us. And if you would like to be connected to online groups or would like additional information about First Unitarian, please contact her through the email address in the chat. And please keep your microphones muted during the entire service. After the service, you're welcome to turn on your microphones and join us in the coffee hour breakout rooms. And now let us come together in the spirit of worship with these words. Let us worship with our eyes and ears and fingertips, said Kenneth Patton. Never has it been more true. We turn our eyes to screens, we turn our ears to listen to speakers, our fingertips touch keyboards or mice or touchpads, fiddle with volume knobs or buttons. Across the waves, across the town, the state, and across the country, we gather together. Let us worship with the full opening of all the windows of our beings, with the full outstretching of our spirits, Patton continued in words familiar in our hymnal. Today we stretch out not arms to clasp one another, but truly the outstretching of our spirits. We stretch out our connections of caring, of courage, of compassion. We stretch out our spirits to bind ourselves in religious community in new ways. Life comes with singing and laughter, with tears and confiding, with a rising wave too great to be held in the mind and heart and body to those who have fallen in love with life, says Patton. We come together to share joys and sorrows, that we might know one another better and be present to the passing of our days, our trials, and our triumphs. We bear witness to the fullness of our lives, not shared in one building, but held lovingly across distance. Let us worship and let us learn to love, Patton concludes. Amen. May it be so. Okay, if my computer is going to cooperate this morning, I'm going to share a story with you. Let's see here. Oh, right. I got booted out and came back in, so I need to be made a host again in order to do that. I'll give Reverend Amy a moment to hear. And try again. Okay, I'm just going to share the story with you verbally, and that's okay. This is based on The Invisible String by Patricia Karst, and it's a lovely story. It's illustrated by Jeff Stevenson. I encourage you to take a look at it sometime. And in her story, she tells the story of Liz and Jeremy, two twins who are having trouble going to sleep, as many of us do sometimes.
Cindy, you are co-host, you can share.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy. Okay. And wait, I did it wrong. Well, I'm sorry, I'm having so many technical difficulties today, folks. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but it's decided this morning it's time to act up, and it's freezing. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. I would just go ahead and read it then.
I'm going to just do that. So Liz and Jeremy, the twins, were asleep one calm and quiet night. And my computer is frozen, so I can't advance the story, but here's how it goes. Oh, wait, it's catching up. And so they were having trouble feeling their mother, and she responded by holding up a string in front of them and said, "This is how we are still connected, even when you're up in your beds, and when I'm downstairs. This is an invisible string, and it connects each and every one of us." And they were like, "What?" She said, "Yes, the invisible string connects each person from heart to heart to heart to heart. And it's always there, even when we're distant." And the twins started asking questions, and they said, "Well, is it true even when we're at school?" And she says, "Even then." "Is it true even when we're at ballet school?" "Yes, even then we're connected by this invisible string." "What if we were on a ship sailing in the ocean? Would it still be connected?" "Yes," said their mom, "we're still connected." "What if I was under the ocean? Could we still be connected?" And she said, "Yes, we're still connected by that invisible string." Jeremy, or his sister, whose name I've just forgotten, and then asked, "What if I was on the moon? Would we still be connected?" And she said, "Yes, we're still connected, always connected by that invisible string." Well, with this, the twins felt much more comforted, and they went back to sleep, and they dreamed about all the ways they were connected to and all the people that they were connected to. They were connected to their grandparents, to their teachers, to their cats and their dog, to even those people and animals who passed away in their lives, their great aunt Susan and their precious cat Fluffy, and how they're connected to each and every person across the world by this invisible string. And thus ends our story.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Today's offertory words are also international in source from a website of the First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto, a Unitarian answer to an age-old question. And that question is, how many Unitarians does it take to change a light bulb? And here's the Unitarian answer. We choose not to make a statement, either in favor of or against the need for a light bulb. However, if in your own journey you have found that light bulbs work for you, that's wonderful. You are invited to write a poem or compose a modern dance about your personal relationship with your light bulb. Present it next month at our annual Light Bulb Sunday service, in which we will explore a number of light bulb traditions, including incandescent, fluorescent, three-way, long life, and tinted, all of which are equally valid paths to luminescence. Now comes your opportunity to help light up the lives of others. The morning offering will now be given and received through the link in the chat. 1/2 of this electronic plate goes to the internal social justice programs of the church, and 1/2 to our Faith in Action partners, Planned Parenthood, and Central Iowa Immigrant Support Coalitions. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to all who gave during that opportunity to support our church and our community. A church is not the building, but a community. As a community of human hands and human hearts, we come together to share our laughter and our tears and to bear witness and minister to one another as we struggle with life's sorrows and celebrate life's joys. Let us share together now the names of anyone we know who could use some special care and attention. As we type their names into the chat, may the love of our community hold them all. May the light of our community shine on the broken places of the world. May the work of our hands and hearts support, aid, and comfort all those who hunger or thirst for food or water, justice or freedom. May we never look away when we are needed. May those who are grieving be comforted. May those who are tired find rest. May the broken places be healed. May those who are filled with joy and laughter be abundant. Now together we light 3 candles. One for the joys and sorrows we have shared, one for the names we have written, and one last candle for all of the joys and all of the sorrows which are deeply held, but remain unspoken here today.
Comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, oh my soul. Sing with me, oh my soul. Sing with me, oh my soul.
Let us join in a moment of prayer or meditation with these words from Teresa Inez Soto's book, Spilling the Light. This is titled, A Charm for Hope, a String. This is a charm for hope. The first thing to do is to tie a string around your finger. Remember that you are not alone. Think of all the ways that our best shared futures are braided inextricably with your own present and your own identity, your own destiny. The second thing is to untie the string and let the knots of tightness fall away. Let the burden of bleakness roll off your sore shoulders. Resistance on these opaque horizons only requires one source of strength, one ray of light. Remember that persistence doesn't require all the answers up front, only one. Fortunately, for all of us, we have one response: to remain together through awkward times and happy ones. We remember and we find our resolve in one another. Blessed be and amen. Ashe. our response, to remain together through awkward times and happy ones. We remember and we find our resolve in one another. Blessed be. Amen. Ashe.
The Seven of Pentacles by Marge Piercy. Under a sky the color of pea soup, she is looking at her work growing away there, actively, thickly like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eat insects a home and winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot tell always by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections. Create real nodes. Build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we're going to live for a long time. Not always, for every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. Our centering song this morning is number 346. Come sing a song with me. The words will be copied in the chat screen.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you home when home is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Share a rose with me, that I might know your mind, and I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find, and I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Oh, thank you both for sharing the gift of music with us this morning. So I have determined that what is going on is that anytime I try to touch anything else on my computer, like my text to scroll it up, that's when my Zoom window freezes. So I have sent my sermon to my phone and I'm preaching off of this. And I feel like it's a metaphor for everything that we've been dealing with this last year, 15 months, during this time of how we have to be flexible and adaptive and do new things in new ways and turn on a dime in the spur of a moment. And I feel like this is a moment right now in our culture, in our society, in our world, which we have an opportunity to seize the opportunity to do something different and reinvent ourselves, our society, our faith, our institutions like never before. But let me start by going back a little bit. I don't believe in organized religion, a friend said to me once. More than once, many times, many friends. How many of you have heard those words before? I don't believe in organized religion. Now, it's a popular point of view in our society and growing more and more popular all the time. And while I tend to be kind of snarky and said, what, you don't believe in it? I'm sure it exists, even though my own religion's pretty disorganized. I have a more thoughtful response that I'd like to give to that sometimes. About a decade ago, a Pew Research study on the millennial generation said this. They said, by some key measures, Americans aged 18 to 29 are considerably less religious than older Americans. Fewer young adults belong to any particular faith than older people do today. They're also less likely to be affiliated with their parents' and grandparents' generations than they were when they were young. Fully 1 in 4 members of the millennial generation are unaffiliated with any particular faith. And they go on. The trends they identified a decade ago have continued. In 2019, just kind of before we went into this pandemic time, the Pew Forum stated that their surveys showed that 65% of Americans described themselves as Christian, and that was down 12% over the decade. And those not religiously affiliated had grown in corresponding percentages. The connection between religious affiliation and individualism or independence is shown in Robert Putnam's book from 2 decades ago, Bowling Alone, in which he says, regular worshipers and people who say that religion is very important to them are much more likely than other people to visit friends, to entertain at home, to attend social club meetings, and to belong to sports groups, professional and academic societies, school service groups, youth groups, service clubs, hobby or garden clubs, literary, art, discussion and study groups, school fraternities and sororities, farm organizations, political clubs, national groups, other miscellaneous groups. Religiosity rivals education as a powerful correlate of most forms of civic engagement. So just as religion was on the decline, he argued, these forms of social engagement were also on the decline. But the good news is that right now, at this particular moment, as we come out of a pandemic as a society, I think we in Unitarian Universalism are particularly well poised for change. People have experienced an aloneness like they've never experienced before, and they are hungry for community, but for a new kind of community, one that embraces individualism while still valuing the collective. And I think that we as a faith have a particular message in a particular moment right now. In order to seize this moment, I think we have to look at church life entirely differently. And we need to look at the unique aspects of Unitarian Universalism and what we have to offer the world as part of that. But first, let's examine the problem a little more. Within our faith, we embody the tension between individual and community. And that can be one of our most sore spots and one of our greatest strengths. We're a faith based on freedom. We're based on our congregational polity, our non-creedal faith, our fourth principle that says we believe in people's right to seek their own spiritual truth, our fifth principle, which speaks to the role of democracy. We can believe what we want. We can call who we want as minister. We can sell our building if we want, and no larger body is going to tell us what we can and cannot do in the congregational-based faith, right? Ever since the Cambridge platform, when we made the congregation the center of our polity, we've stressed our autonomy as congregations, and then within congregations, our autonomy as individuals. We're not just the no hell church, we're the no guilt church, the no faith church, the do what you want church, right? Or at least sometimes that's how we describe ourselves. This goes back a long way. Our faith is tied to our society through one very influential essay. In 1847, the Transcendentalist Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson published his famous essay, Self-Reliance. One of the most famous of American essays, it deeply ingrained itself into the American consciousness. It became part of the fabric of our lives. In it, he is really talking about trusting oneself most of all. A favorite quote of mine and of many from that essay is, "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string." Another favorite quote, particularly among our iconoclastic breed of religious followers, is, "Whosoever must be a man," and I apologize for the gendered language there, but "whosoever must be a man must be a nonconformist. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world." The dark underside of self-reliance, of independence, of freedom, of our congregational polity is our neglect of community sometimes, our neglect of the common good. And so we must hold those things, independence and interdependence, in creative, dynamic tension. Another way of looking at these shifts in society comes from Andrew Solomon's book, Far from the Tree. Solomon talks about horizontal versus vertical identity. Vertical identities are those identity elements that you as a person get from your parents, your race, your ethnicity, usually your language, a lot of our culture. But not every piece of our identity is something we share with our parents. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender children are quite often born to heterosexual and cisgendered parents. And this is horizontal identity because we find our identity group among our peers. This is, if you think about it beyond the personal to the societal, this is growing like the squash plant, as Marge Piercy put it, instead of growing like the tree. We search outside of our family for connections around something that is core and important to us. Now, religion in America, I would argue, used to be largely a vertical identity thing. Part of this was independence. Churches were isolated, vertical institutions pointed at the sky. And connection-wise, religion was something that you inherited from your parents. We still see some of that vertical identity in some of our churches, families who have been here for generations. But in Unitarian Universalism, we don't see that quite nearly as much as church being a horizontal connection. Growing generationally, vertically like the tree doesn't always work for us as a faith. And so we have to think about how we grow horizontally, like the squash plant, like a chat group, how to grow like a meme. This is what we need to do, have always done to some extent, but need to do more now in this unique, unusual time in which we find ourselves. Horizontal communities are proliferating, but their availability has weakened the perceived need for church to be one of those, because most people think of church in this vertical way still. And so we have the rise of the nuns, those who don't attend any church, and that number is growing and growing because it's easier to build that horizontal community in other ways than it used to be. Think about maybe the first time you came to church. Were you looking for community if you came out of another faith and you were looking for a place where you could connect with like-minded people? That's what brought me back into Unitarian Universalism after having left it in college. And I moved down to Georgia, and I didn't know how to find people who believed things like I did, except I knew I could find them at the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I went back to my faith. But now if I were to leave church and be looking for community, I could find community of like-minded people in all sorts of places via the internet. So this reality is what our former UUA president was talking about in 2012 when he wrote a working paper called Congregations and Beyond. He said, congregations as local parishes arose in a different era. They arose in a time of limited mobility and communication. When Unitarianism and Universalism were in their infancy, no one would think of belonging to a congregation 10 miles away. Churches were the centers of community life, in a largely agricultural society. To be limited to a traditional parish form of organization in the 21st century is like limiting ourselves to a technology that does not require electricity. So, if we need to think beyond that early American model of church, what can we look to? Well, the good news is we've been forced into it over this last year. We've been finding it in amazing ways amidst the crisis of necessity. Here, when we talk about change, we get to the squash plant at last. In the environment when churches were struggling to survive, there were things that were thriving. And some of those answers were about our interdependence. In Unitarian Universalism, we have this autonomy of the individual congregation, but we are also an association of other congregations, and there's the balance. Sometimes we see ourselves as that little church in the wildwoods, as it were, separate. That's an image my former church in Michigan liked to use a lot, the church in the wildwoods. Separate, distinct, not really connected at all to the larger body. And it was to our detriment, because we are not Unitarian Universalists unless we are in association. We cannot be Unitarian Universalists in all that that means alone. We can only be it in association with other congregations as part of a larger body that we know as our living tradition or our faith. The good news, I think, is that we are on the brink of a great new awakening. And I could do a whole sermon about that concept as we look at generational theory, the work of Strauss and Howe in their book, Generations, and in the, I think it's the Fourth Turning, where they talk about how cycles of generations come and go, and then there becomes a crisis moment, and we begin a new society. We did that in the Great New Deal after the recession, and I think we're in that moment now. After the crisis of the pandemic, after we saw the attack on our capital, we're in this moment when we can grow and build the next society that is to come. A few years ago, back at the UUMA, which UU Ministers Association Institute, the Reverend Scott Taylor, who was then the director of congregational life at the UUA, talked about how our future is in realizing that now, with so much at our fingertips, the idea that every church has to be able to do everything, and that ministers are these great generalists who have to be great at everything and do everything for their church themselves, is a model that was breaking down and unsustainable. He said, I would say our calling is to just end the ridiculous habits and structures that we have and the culture we have of isolated ministers working in isolated churches. We have a calling to work in partnership. Structurally, you see, we've each been a tree in that forest, each growing, trying to reach the sky, spread our branches, build our steeples to cover as much as we can of our own area. And then when the pandemic hit this year, we realized this does not work anymore. It's not sustainable. And so we built networks fast and furiously. I saw groups grow up on Facebook from 10 to 1,000 overnight of Unitarian Universalists working together to say, how do we survive and thrive in this changing time, in this pandemic? As congregations were shutting their doors, we were going online, and ministers and religious educators and laity built networks for resource sharing and cooperation. We started doing things. Have you been visiting other churches at all this year where you've said, this week we're going to another church, or had another church come visit you? In my, no? Yes? Or have you been joining services with other congregations where 2 of you or 3 of you as congregations have come together and done a joint service this year? Yes? No? Some. In my congregation here in Massachusetts, we've shared worship this year with services in Michigan, Ohio, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and in Mexico. And we can't always do that when the pandemic ends, right? We can't just we want to be back in our buildings and having live in-person worship again. But there are ways we can continue this horizontal connection, this growing like squash plants. And we need to start thinking about how not to be just churches in silos, but working together across clusters and allow our energy to provide, our clergy to provide energy for each of the churches in our squash plant to do what they do best. Those clusters might be regional, but they might be based on things like our size or our passions or our areas of social justice work. I've been saying for years that ministry needs to change. Ministers have always been these great generalists, but we have our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think we need to work in cooperation with each other to achieve an excellence in ways we cannot do alone. So I know from years of working together with your minister that Reverend Amy has these great pieces of knowledge in everything from like internet security to art to how to deal with difficult cats. And I possess an amazing amount of knowledge about 80s culture and dystopia. Now, that might not come in handy all the time, but it has come in handy this past year. And together we can build networks of mutual support and reliability and to shore up each other in our times of need. Amy and I have been doing this for like a decade together or so, where we are moderators of a Facebook group for UU ministers. And ministers come into this Facebook group, and sometimes it gets a little squirrely in there, but when it's at its best, it's people coming in and saying, I need to know more about this. I didn't learn it in seminary, or I've never encountered this before, or this is a whole new idea to me. I need to know how to do this. And a dozen other ministers come on and say, yeah, I need to know how to do that too. And then another dozen ministers come on and say, here's what I found worked for me in that situation. And sometimes this is as trivial as finding the best, biggest, brightest flame for your chalice. And sometimes it's as meaningful as saying, how do I talk to my congregation as I'm going through divorce? And sometimes it's like, I want to build a worship associates program, and I've never done that before. We need to think about other ways and ways we can connect our churches for the future to build on what we've learned in this past year. If we're going to build the church of the future, we need to go outside our trees, outside our silos and steeples, and be something interconnected with rabbit runs. Maybe this is more obvious to you out in Iowa than it is to those of us closer to Boston, where we can feel like, oh, we have a lot of other churches right around the corner, and so that community is easier to build. And when you don't have that, sometimes it's more obvious how hard it is to do. But I saw this for sure when I was serving in that rural congregation in the middle of Michigan, an isolated little congregation with our steeple pointed at the sky. We were a church in a silo, one minister, one congregation, working largely by ourselves. And there were limits to what we could do unless we started connecting out further. So one of the ways we did that on the local level, because we had no other UU congregation within 45 minutes, we worked with congregational churches and with the synagogue and with the local Muslim group to build interfaith community. We worked with we didn't have enough people to train to lead OWL in our congregation, the Our Whole Lives Sexuality curriculum. So instead, we built connections with our local Planned Partnerhood and brought them in to do sexuality education. And so by partnering with local groups, we were able to provide much more than we as an isolated congregation could do. And ultimately, that's what will make us sustainable as a faith, to connect wider and wider, to become something more interdependent. We need to spread like that squash plant that overruns the garden, weave real connections, create real nodes, keep tangling in and interweaving and taking in more. So I want to tell this to you in another way, through a story. This is a story that I've seen many different versions of, and the one I'm drawing from was attributed to a British minister, C.H. Spurgeon. Here's how it goes. A pastor heard that one of his parishioners was going about announcing to one and all that he would no longer attend church services. This rebellious parishioner was advancing the familiar argument that he could communicate with God just as easily out in the fields with nature as in his setting for worship. One winter evening, the pastor called on the reluctant member of his flock for a friendly visit, and the two men sat before the fireplace, making small talk, but studiously avoiding the issue of church attendance. After a while, the pastor took the tongs from the rack next to the fireplace and pulled out a single coal from the fire. He placed that coal, that glowing ember, on the hearth, and as the two watched in silence while the fire roared, the coal quickly ceased burning and turned to ashen gray. The other coals in the fire continued to burn brightly. The pastor's silent message was not lost on his member. After a long time, he turned to the pastor and said, "I'll be back in church next Sunday." Each of us is that glowing coal, of course. We have heat and light and energy to share, and we can continue for a while on our own, but we will burn out. We need community, I think religious community, to keep that passionate fire alive. But our church is also that coal. It has heat and light and energy to share. But unless it connects to other churches, other organizations, other institutions in a meaningful way, it too will burn out over time. In the book Church 3.0, author Neil Cole says that overall, we have to move from an organization dedicated to protecting what we have, a building, a community, a way of being here, to an organization that is focused outside our four walls, focused on changing what's wrong out there. This is what I think people are saying when they say that they're spiritual but not religious. We can have too much focus on our one individual institution and not enough focus on building the movement for love and justice. The Reverend James Forbes of Riverside Church of New York, which is UCC and American Baptist, said about a decade ago, again at that UU Ministers Association Institute, he said that Unitarian Universalists have already been called by God, or I would add the universe or our broken earth, for a specific purpose. And what we have been called for as a faith has something to do with our excellence in interfaith cooperation and which is necessary for overcoming the systems of militarism and capitalism and building the beloved community. Michael Piazza, a UCC minister who was formerly at the Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, said this. He said, "We can either give birth to new congregations in our old churches or resign ourselves to being glorified funeral homes. Our best advice is to plant a vegetable patch of liberal, active, passionate adults who might just believe that the Church of Jesus Christ can save the world." Yeah, we might use different words, right? Let me rephrase that in Unitarian Universalism. We can either change and grow like a cabbage patch or resign to being a single dying tree that will one day fall. So the best thing we can do is to plant a vegetable patch of liberal, active, passionate UUs who might just believe that we together have the power to bend the arc of the universe towards justice. That's the ultimate goal, folks, here. We are wanting this faith to succeed and to thrive and to grow and change, not just because of the connection we need as individuals and that we have longed for in this time of isolation, but because we know that together, if we are successful, this faith has the power to change the world, to change the universe. So I say, plant your vegetable patch, because Unitarian Universalism can change the world, and we will change the world. We are uniquely poised to be the religious community of the future, but we have to take our mission seriously, and we have to take interdependence seriously. We have to get beyond our own individual selves sometimes and look for the community and the power of community. There are people out there, and they might say that they are spiritual but not religious, and so they don't know that they're looking for us. But if we build a faith that is truly connected to each other, to other institutions in our community, to the work of love and justice, the people who don't know that they're looking for religion, but do know that they're looking for community and do know that they're looking for justice, they will find us. They will find that we are a place that is the place for meaning makers, where they can connect and invest in the future with people and build the world to come. They are out there right now looking for something in this after times, after the time of pandemic, after the time of societal disruption, to see what is going to come next. And we have the opportunity here in our amazing prophetic faith, with our excellence in working with the interfaith community, and I would say with our strong history of religious liberalism and individualism and anti-oppression witness and action. And we need to harness these things, deepen our spirituality, take our mission out into the world, serve those needs greater than our own, build the beloved community, stand, sit, roll, be on the side of love. What an amazing world this will be if we can truly take up this call, from Iowa to Massachusetts and around the world from there. May it be so.
Reverend Cindy, thank you for those thoughtful words and for being with us today. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our final song this morning is number 1021, Lean on Me. The words are copied in the chat screen.
Sometimes in our lives we all have pain. understand. We all need somebody to lean on. We all need somebody to lean on.
We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connections, our concerns, or our care for one another. We hold on to the invisible string that binds us and continue to weave real connections across the spaces between us. Our service has ended, but our service to each other and to the world and to our faith continues. Amen.